I'm struggling. I said, I cannot share my presentation. Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the Red Meat Industry Services monthly webinar. So my name is Ernest Makua. I'm a livestock technical advisor for the Red Meat Industry Services. We do this webinar on a monthly basis to share information with the farmers as much as possible so that they can farm profitably and sustainably. So we're trying to introduce different techniques, different management methods that the farmers may adopt depending on their locations and so forth, so that they can be able to improve their profit margin. And one part of it that we are addressing is the part of sustainability, and which includes, amongst others, circularity of nutrients. Sorry, just bear with me. I'm just charging my laptop. I've got it. Okay. So today our topic is optimizing nutrient circularity for profitable and sustainable cattle farming. So I'm going to share with you my slide for today's presentation. But before I do that, I would like to notify everyone who's here that if you've got any comment or any question that has to do with my presentation for today, you can just write your question inbox, or you can just wait for me just after the presentation. We will have a discussion session whereby everyone will be able to ask their questions orally or in a written format. So you can put in your question, your comment on the inbox, or you can wait for the presentation to end and then you can ask your questions orally. So my presentation is going to be quite short so that I don't overfeed you with information to a degree that you don't even understand or you don't even follow in terms of what I'm talking about for today's webinar. So I'm going to share my slides with you now. And just gonna ask if can you see my slides on the screen? Can I see a thumb up, or someone can just say yes? Can everyone see my slides? Okay, for the purpose of the presentation, I'm also going to switch my mic off. I'm only going to be left with, sorry, not my mic. I'm going to switch my camera off. I'm going to be left with only the mic, just for everyone to not be disturbed throughout the presentation. Okay, my camera is off. Right. The topic of today, like I said, is optimizing nutrient circularity for profitable and sustainable cattle farming. My name is Ernest Makua. I'm from the Red Meat Industry Services. Our offices are located in Ferry Glen, that is in Pretoria. So my presentation today, it is aimed at the following aspects. Firstly, it will uncover the farmer's perspective and understanding of circularity, as well as the barriers and opportunities for adoption, and most importantly, our scaling of circularity practices in South Africa. But we'll also identify and develop ways to support farmers to move towards more circular practices in their livestock enterprises. And lastly, our focus is also to ensure that we explore the practical potential methods for implementing nutrient circulation to attain environmental and economic benefits that comes with the implementation of circularity of nutrients in cattle enterprises across the country in South Africa. Right. The question comes, and some farmers or some of you may be asking yourself as to what actually is circularity in agriculture? But then let's form the basis. Livestock production is a component of agriculture, as you have known, that it plays a very crucial role in the economy of Africa, not only in South Africa, and that is through provision of support to most communal communities. Like you have known that in some communal areas, most people, they depend on this 3, 4, 5, or at times 50 cattle to support their families. And cattle produce large volume of manure in both emerging and communal farming sector. So as a boy who grew up in a farm or communal areas whereby I was a headman, I was taking cattle, sheep and goats to graze and bring them back at home. Those ones we have got kraals at home, you'll know that there's always quite a lot of manure that can also be used for fertilizing crops at home. So this is what we call circularity of nutrients. So, and the manure plays a key role in crop production by providing the essential nutrients such as the nitrogen, the phosphorus and potassium, which are very instrumental when it comes to ensuring that the growth of grass or pasture is stimulated thereof to ensure that it can remain fresh for consumption in future. And the farmers can implement this cycling of nutrients in manure for production, just also to improve in terms of buying chemical fertilizers from the cooperatives. They can just use exactly what they have, the manure that is produced by their own cattle, without spending a lot of money by going to cooperatives and ensuring that they buy those chemicals to fertilize their cattle. And this is what we call in the main the climate smart or sustainable agriculture, to ensure that in so doing, by producing those food for our communities and for ourselves, but we also care for the environment. That is very key. So, but let's explain in short what is circularity in the layman's term. What we mean by saying circularity. So, what you're looking at on your screen is a farm nutrient cycling structure on your left, and then on your right is addition of the human consumption in terms of this circularity scenario. So ideally, you'll have a farmer who has got cattle, and then the very same cattle, they obviously feed themselves on the pastures that are found within the area or within the camps themselves that the farmer has. So there are some pastures in some other areas, you will have what you call sweet grasses in high percentage, and then in some other parts of the country, you will have the sour grasses. We have got different agroecological zones in the country. We have got areas which have got high rainfall, and then we have got areas which has got a very low rainfall. So that it will also have impact in terms of the types of grasses that they grow. But normally, as you have known that In some areas whereby there's higher availability of rainfall, it will mostly have high percentage of grasses that are sour. It will have most sour grasses. And then the areas with much lower rainfall in the country, normally they will have a lower, they'll have a lower percentage of sour grasses, meaning the higher the rainfall, the sour the grasses. The lower the rainfall, the sweeter the grass. So, but then let's just now focus on defining or explaining the scenarios that you see on your screen. So what is circularity? So circularity speaks to the cattle enterprises in such a format that you don't have to spend a lot of money in buying chemicals, like I said. You can use the very same manure that you have on your cattle, that are produced by the cattle for fertilization of this very same pastures, or it could be crop farming, so that you have to save also in terms of production or input cost, so that you can also have a better profit margin on your livestock enterprise. So let's define this now. Let's say now you have got on your first scenario, you've got livestock. The livestock, they will feed themselves with the grasses or the pastures that are found within the camps. And then the cattle will obviously produce products that are required by human, which are the milk, your meat, and so forth. But then the basis of that is for the farmer to also be able to make profit out of their livestock enterprises. That is the main aim. I understand from other farmers, when you were to ask them, what is the whole purpose of you establishing a livestock enterprise? Some of them, they will tell you that they want to fight food insecurity. But then in the main, a very honest answer will be that the most important thing of you having a livestock enterprise is to make profit. It's simple like that. So if you don't make profit, you won't be able to survive in this industry. So, but then why do we encourage circularity in your livestock enterprise? This is to make sure that you don't have to spend a lot of money, like I said. But then in the main, it's also to ensure that there's sustainable agriculture and climate smart. You don't do what, well, you don't have to do pollution or do anything that is against the environment, which will lead to it will lead to the opposite of a climate smart. So the cattle will produce the manure, which is the feces or the dung, and it will also produce the urine. The manure, normally, they've got nutrients that are very important for the growth of pasture, which is the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and potassium. So during the production of those manure in the camps, so you will have those nutrients from the manure, meaning that you don't have to go and buy chemical fertilizers for your cattle. Then you can simply use those manure for the fertility of your grasses or pastures. And then those organic fertilizers, they go to the land. And then as in when they go to the land, they fertilize the soil. And then once the soil is fertile, and then there will be better stimulation of growth for the pastures. And then those pastures, they will go back to where? To the cattle. And the cattle will consume this very same pastures. They fertilize themselves by producing those manure. So this is what we say is circularity, meaning the cattle, they produce the manure goes back to the soil is fertile. Once the soil is fertile, and then that is the production of potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus for the growth of the grasses. And then once the grasses are green again, the very same cattle, they can consume the grasses and be able to produce, meaning then you have to save in terms of buying those chemical fertilizers. And then the scenario on your right-hand side is extended one, whereby the human factor comes in as well. And then the human will have to consume the product from the cattle, which include the meat, the milk, and so forth. And then they will also produce the manure at times, which can also be used for fertility of the crops. So I'm moving on from that. Now, circularity, it also plays a very important role in terms of the economy. Is what we call circular economy. A circular economy basically refers to a closed loop of material flows, which includes a potassium, your calcium, and your nitrogen, and so forth. This is very important because in so doing, meaning that the farmers who are using the circularity of nutrients in their farm, they won't have to spend a lot of money. There's another scenario on your left there on the diagram. You can see there. There is the grass that is growing very nice, and then it gets to be consumed by the cattle, sheep, and so forth, all the livestock that you may have. And then once the cattle, they consume those pastures or the grasses or the residues, they will produce manure. And then those manure, they are rich in nitrogen, potassium, calcium, and so forth, which are the minerals that are very instrumental in terms of fertilizing the grasses. But I also want to emphasize that this project is also a project which is a global project, is funded by the funders that you see there on your screen. So all those role players, they form a very huge or a very important component in terms of ensuring the circularity in all the countries that are involved in terms of this project. And the strategies for circular agriculture is to reduce greenhouse gases emission within and between farming system across the agroecological gradients. So for South Africa, it's very important also to implement this to ensure that we reduce the greenhouse emission in the country, but also the farmers are also able to benefit in terms of implementing this circularity by saving in terms of buying those organic fertilizers. So now, from our south in South Africa, from ourselves, the University of Pretoria, the Red Meat Industrial Services, the University of South Africa, we managed to already collect data from various farmers, which amongst others includes the emerging farmers, includes the commercial farmers as well, to just to assess the understanding there of circularity of nutrients from the farmers themselves. Is there any of them by any degree implementing the circularity of nutrients, whether they know that this is a circularity of nutrients, or they may not know about that. But then we wanted to establish if is there any of them who are implementing them, and if there is some of them who don't implement them, what are the barriers in terms of that? So here is the list of circular practices that we can also, we can also ask the farmers, because we already had the questionnaire that we already asked the farmers, and then there are some additional questions that we wanted to ask the farmers on the ground as well. And some of them are in this list, and some of them, those ones which are in this list, we already asked the farmers about them to see if they are doing circularity in their farms. So number one is renewable energy generation consumption. That includes the solar panels. So this is a very important question because now if the farmers are using solar panels, that is circularity of nutrients, because the very same solar panels, they get the energy from the sun, and then the very energy might be used for doing some things in the farm, which it contributes very much into circularity. So for this basic question, it forms part of the additional questions that we're supposed to ask to the farmers in South Africa. And the second question is a recital of biosolids as organic fertilizers and soil condition. This one is one of the questions that we asked, and some of them, they indicated that they use that, but then in the main, those ones who said yes, they are using it, is the commercial farmers. The third one is anaerobic digestion of organic byproduct and waste in on-farm or centralized biogas plants. This one, we are still going to ask them about the question, but then I doubt there is any farmer who uses this type of method. So sorry, I just increased the size of the screen. And the fourth one, that one speaks of the use of cover crops. That includes, amongst others, your legumes, your herbs, grasses, cereal, to be used on the farm includes use as a grain manure and at feedstock or any livestock feed. This one we already asked some of the farmers from the commercial side. The majority of them, they are using this system, and so this form very important part of circularity as well. The water resources management and and wastewater treatment includes rainwater harvesting, the reuse of treated wastewater, separating clean and dirty water, and improving water use efficiently. This one we didn't ask them yet, but we're still going to ask the farmers to see if are they having any form of a water harvesting system on their farms, and that will be another part of circularity. And the sixth one it speaks to the sharing and swapping of contracting labor, which includes, amongst others, machinery and resources like the tractor and all of them, all the resources that are very important on the farms. Are the farmers sharing the equipments on their farms, or they are only using their own resources? So if they are sharing their resources, that is also the circularity. It plays a very important role as well, because then meaning that the farmers don't have to spend a lot of money in terms of buying their own equipments. They can just buy few equipments that they can share amongst themselves. So in so doing, they're also saving in terms of profit as well. Right. And the seventh one, it speaks to the mixed crop livestock farming. How many of the farmers that we have in the country, they are using a mixed crop livestock farming system in their farm? This is very key, is very central in terms of circularity of nutrients, because if you are using a mixed crop livestock farming in your farm, particularly for cattle, meaning then you can crop some maize, meal, and so forth. And once you're done yielding all of those things that you planted on your farm, you can allow the cattle to come and graze the crop residues. So that is the circularity in a way, because during the process of those cattle grazing those crop residues, they can also produce the manure for fertilizing the soil. And then once the soil is fertile, and then during a period whereby you want to plow again, there will be enough fertilizers and those nutrients like nitrogen and potassium, as well as calcium as well, which are very important for the growth of pastures. And the other one, it speaks to the composting of organic byproducts and waste on a farm or centralized, includes the withrow pile, the withrows, piles, and the sheath, etc. This one is one of the questions that we still need to ask the farmers. We haven't yet asked them, but I think most of them, to a certain degree, they are using it. Right. Just want to take a little bit of water. And then we also still now have to ask them in terms of the solid liquid separation of livestock slurry, which includes mechanical methods, but also new technologies that can recover more nutrients and wastewater. This one is also yet to be asked to the farmers, because it forms part of the additional questions on our questionnaire that we're going to ask our farmers. And then the alternative feed ingredients, which includes crop residues, cover crops, waste, byproduct, and so forth. So this one it speaks to question number 7, because if you're using mixed crop livestock farming, you ought to also allow your cattle to graze the crop residues on your farm, which is part of circularity. So now, opportunities for circularity. Is there any opportunities for circularity in the country? What are the drivers for increasing circularity from the perspective of your farm business? So these are some of the questions that we have to answer by the end of the studies that we are doing now, to see, is there any increasing circularity from the perspective of the farmers that we are collecting data from, in terms of how they are going about in terms of ensuring that there's circularity on their farms. And then if they are not implementing none of those measures, what are the barriers as well? And we also have to ask them which 3 practices mentioned from the questionnaires that we had on the previous slides, or also on the previous slide as well, are priority for your farm. They have to choose which ones are priority from the farms and tell us why they're choosing that specific method. And the other question that we have to ask them as well is, do you feel we have the knowledge or the skill to adopt these practices? And if some of them, they don't have the knowledge, and then it will be our prerogative, or we will take upon ourselves to ensure that we educate the farmers on how to implement the circularity system on their farms so that they can start benefiting from the system itself. Are you aware of any, are you aware or receiving any support or incentives to engage with the practices? Incentives, we're speaking to the support that the farmers themselves, they may get from the industry, or they may get from the government themselves, that they can assist them in terms of ensuring that they practice a circularity system on their farms, and also it will be assisting in terms of climate smart as well. And the last question that we ought to ask them is, what else could be done to encourage you to adopt these practices? Some of them, you would imagine, they might say they want to see how is that going to benefit their farms. Ideally, a farmer, before they implement any system on their farm, they will be curious in terms of knowing how is this going to assist them in terms of making their farming enterprises profitable and also sustainable. Is that going to help them in doing that? And then if the answer is yes, most of the farmers, they are more than willing to implement any system that is going to help them to increase profitability of their farm, but also to assist them in terms of sustainability of their farms. Right. Now, there's a variety of systems that the farmers can also implement on their farms that can also assist in terms of increasing circularity of nutrients in their farm. And amongst other systems that farmers can implement, which has got much higher potential in terms of circularity of nutrients, is the high intensity grazing system. The high intensity grazing system in itself, it helps to increase the circularity of nutrients in the farms, because the high intensity grazing in itself is a system. It is a system whereby the cattle they are kept in a very high intense camps, so that they can graze certain camps in a period of time. And then once the grass is a little bit overgrazed, and then they move the cattle to another camps, and then so that they can give the same camps that were grazed previously by the cattle enough time to rest, but to regrow. But then during the process of grazing those camps, what is important is that, remember, the cattle are producing the manure, which are rich in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are the key nutrients in terms of stimulating the grass growth. They are fertilizing the soil. So, but then one other part which is very important, which worth noting, is that the production of manure not alone does it stimulate the growth of the pastures. Another important factor includes the enzymes or the saliva, but also the urine itself. It contains a very important elements that are very important in terms of fertilizing the soil, but for the growth of the pasture. But first of all, let's also define what is high intensity grazing. The high intensity grazing is a grazing system. Is a grazing system that have gained a prominence in the recent agricultural research due to the potential to enhancing forage utilization, animal performance, and overall sustainability. Remember, if you're farming, you want to have your farm enterprises to be sustainable. First of all, it must be profitable. Once it's profitable, it must also be sustainable. So the system strategically increasing livestock stocking rates to optimize forage utilization and promotes efficiency in nutrient circularity. So the system itself, like I said, it encourages the circularity of nutrients because like other people that I've already spoken to, they say they double the size of the carrying capacity of their land. And by so doing, the intensity will be high. But here's the thing. Livestock, they like selective grazing, like human being. If you were to give a human being a meat and then give them also a potato or let's say cabbage, because they always like meat, the meat will finish first and then the cabbage will finish last. The same thing applies to livestock grazing. There's sweet grasses and then there's sour grasses. What happens during grazing period is that the cattle will start grazing the sweet grasses first. And then once they're done with the sweet grasses and there's no more sweet grasses, they will only start grazing the sour grasses. But remember, the sour grasses, they are very sour. So they don't like grazing those grasses. But also the most important factor is that the sour grasses, they don't have those required nutrients. They've got very low nutrients availability that are very important for maintaining the body condition score of the cattle, which will subsequently increase the consumption rate. So it's very important to understand that as well, because with the high intensity grazing system, it forces the cattle to graze both the sour and the sweet grasses at the same level. And then the sour grasses don't like to be grazed. The sweet grasses, they like being grazed, but they don't like being overgrazed. But then if you level the ground and then you are forcing them to graze both the sour and the sweet grasses on the same level, over time, the sweet grasses will the sweet grasses will outcompete the sour grasses, because the sour grasses, they don't enjoy being grazed. And then once they are being grazed too often, they will dissipate over time. So that's where the high intensity grazing system is very important, or is very key in terms of circularity of nutrients. Because then if you implement this system, meaning that you are going to have more and more of sweet grasses, which will help to maintain the body condition score of your cattle, which in a way, it will also increase the consumption rate of your cattle. So that is why we say with the high intensity grazing system, you can increase the circularity of nutrients on your farm. So the high intensity grazing promotes the superior forage utilization and increase the biomass production. So the livestock, like I said, they are forced to graze more evenly, preventing selective grazing, promoting a more uniform nutrient distribution across the pastures. So which is very important. So when that take place, and then you are rest assured that you start having much more diversity in terms of sweet grasses than the sour grasses. And this closes the cropping and rapid defoliation cycle inherent in this system, stimulating the plant's growth, leading to more efficient use of available nutrients. So now let's talk about the saliva under high intensity grazing. Like I said previously on the previous slide, saliva from grazing livestock contain essential nutrients such as your nitrogen, your potassium, your phosphorus, which are very critical for the grass growth. So if you're having the intensity high under high intensity grazing, you're going to have more or high availability of saliva in close compact. So meaning that there's going to be high stimulation of growth, because the cattle, as in when they graze the grasses, they leave the saliva on the grasses, which contains the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, which in return, it will stimulate the growth of the grasses. That is number one. As livestock graze and bite down on the pastures, they deposit saliva on the plants, like I said, delivering these nutrients directly back into the soil. And saliva contains growth hormones like auxins. Auxins is very important in terms of stimulating the regrowth of the grazed pastures. So you can tell by so saying that there's higher stimulation of, or there's increased nutrient circularity under high intensity grazing, because first of all you get the nutrients from the saliva. Number two, you get the nutrients from the urine from the cattle. Number three, you get the nutrients from the manure. So there's three key elements: is the urine, is the saliva, is the manure, which produce the key nutrients, which are very key in terms of pasture growth stimulation. So this is a very increased form of a circularity of nutrients. So for the farmers who were to implement the high intensity grazing, chances are you are going to have better growth of your grasses, and then you're also in a long run going to have a better body conditions of your cattle, because now you have got a very well managed grazing method. Now, let's talk about the tick control. The high intensity grazing, and this is based on the data that I've already collected from the farmers in South Africa. It's particularly the farmers that were found in a sour belt of the area in South Africa. Some of them, they were in some areas whereby there's higher percentage of sweet grasses, and some of them, they were found in the mixed belt, meaning there's 50-50 availability of 50% sour grasses and 50% sour grasses. So this is what I found. Like I said, let's say, for example, let's discuss the impact of ticks. The ticks, they cause other irritation, inflammation, and potentially resulting in discomfort and stress in a cattle. And this subsequently impact on the overall animal well-being, and it will subsequently also affect your beef production. And also, very important, remember the ticks, they can also cause the illnesses on cattle. And amongst other illnesses, it includes the anaplasmosis. Normally, we call it gall sickness or gall sickness, babesiosis, the red water fever, hard water, very deadly in some other parts of the country. So cowdriosis, hard water. So it's very important that you do what you call tick control on your farm. But then how does this fit in terms of circularity of nutrients? Based on the data that I collected, or the data that we collected in South Africa, let's speak about the trembling effect. Remember, if you're using the high intensity grazing, the intensity is high, the trembling effect, it becomes higher. The trembling effect, we're referring to when the cattle, they step over the soil, they soften the soil. They soften the soil again and again and again because the intensity is too high. So the trembling effect under high intensity grazing, the intensive grazing can lead to trembling, which disrupts the tick population by destroying their habitat and also decreasing their survival rates. So that is under high intensity grazing. This is very telling, meaning if you're using the high intensity grazing system, chances are you're going to have lesser tick infestation. From the farmers that I've already spoken to already, they told me that since they implemented the high intensity grazing, they don't dip, because another important factor, they said that the high intensity grazing, the trembling effect, interrupts the life cycle of ticks by moving animals before ticks complete their development stages on the pastures. So meaning if you're using or you implemented high intensity grazing, chances are high that you're not going to have to dip more often. If anything, you may dip to a lesser extent. But from those ones that I've already spoken to, or that we have already spoken to in South Africa, they say they haven't used any dip for a very long time. And that is economic impact. Meaning then, if you're using the high intensity grazing, you are not only benefiting in terms of circularity of nutrients, you are benefiting in terms of the economic impact of it, because then meaning that you don't have to buy the dips, then your profit margin, it will slightly go a little bit higher. So which is very key. So if we were to encourage the farmers to implement high intensity grazing, the motivation thereof, it will be that you will have higher circularity of nutrients. That is number one. Number two, you'll also save in terms of buying medication for dips, for dipping or for controlling ticks in your farm. So now we collected data from those farmers in the country who are using the high intensity grazing, but we also try to analyze economic impact of the high intensity grazing. I will be finishing very soon. So I'm just going to try to summarize this. So now we try to make assumptions in terms of people who are interested in implementing the high intensity grazing. The benefits. What are the benefits of implementing the system on your farm? Majority of the farmers that we already spoken to, they say you'll have less ticks, and then less ticks will lead to less disease in your farm. The less disease leads to healthier cattle. Healthier cattle lead to higher conception rate, plus minus 80% conception rate, according to them. Higher conception rate will lead to higher winning rate, plus minus 80%. So this is what we are looking for, according to the data that we collected. And then now let's speak about livestock nutrition and the high intensity grazing. You'll have less spending in terms of buying organic fertilizers. That is number one. Reduction on overgrazing and the high intensity grazing, because now you are managing your camps. Majority of them, or almost all of them, they say if they are using the high intensity grazing, the cattle, they graze one camp and then they'll only get back to graze the very same camp after 12 months, meaning in a year period of time. So they graze one camp and then they leave it for a period of about 12 months for the grass to grow better, to regrow without any disturbance, meaning you are reducing the chances of overgrazing. Then there's better pasture growth, right? Reduction of overgrazing, which will lead to increased grass availability. And then enough grass availability will lead to improved body condition score. You understand that the body condition score is highly linked to conception rate of the cattle. And then improved body condition score lead to increased conception rate, plus minus 90% on a long run. This is on a long run. And then high conception rate will lead to improved winning percentage on a long run, plus minus 90%. Those were the assumptions that we calculated on an economic scale. Right. Let's say you were to implement the high intensity grazing, on the first year. You'll have decreased conception rate, especially if you were to implement the first year when you start implementing the high intensity grazing. Remember, you're forcing your cattle to graze those grasses that they don't have enough nutrients and so forth. The conception rate will decline because the body condition score of the cattle will also decline. Because now remember, you are forcing your cattle to graze the sour grasses, and the sour grasses, they don't have enough nutrients availability. So on the first year of implementing the system itself, there will be a decrease in conception rate, around 10% decrease, 10% decline. You must expect it. But then that is first year when you implement it. But then on the second year, you must expect an increase of 10%, meaning your conception rate will go back to normal, to where you expect it to be, 10%. So ideally, when you have it at 10%, then let's say, for example, we just made some assumptions in terms of calculation. You have got 10% increase of consumption rate times 32 rand. Let's say the price of that week is 32 rand per kg for winners, and then the estimated body weight is 280 kg. So then chances are you're going to sell at a better value. Now, let's talk about the base carrying capacity of your camps. Let's say you are based on the first day of implementation. Let's say the base is 1,000 hectare per livestock unit. sorry, the carrying capacity, the land size is 1,000 hectare, and then the carrying capacity is 3 hectare per livestock unit on the first year. Instead of doubles carrying capacity or increasing the carrying capacity of your camps immediately, let's say you just add, let's say you start with 300 cattle. You say 300 cattle times 80% conception rate times 240 winners to be sold per annum, meaning that we are estimating that the 80% of 80% winners of weight 80% conception rate of the winners of those cattle, those 300 cattle, it will be around 240 winners times 32 rand of a winning price estimation by that time, and then times 230 kg, meaning per annum you will be able to make around 1.8 million per year. If you've got a land of 1,000 hectare, 3 hectare per livestock unit, 300 cattle, 80% winning rate, and you get 240 winners per year. And then you times that by 32 rand per winner price, and then 230 kg per winner price. And then on the first year, you will get only 1.8 rand profit. The second year of implementation, now you reduce the livestock unit, you add 50 cattle on top of the carrying capacity. So now you are no longer dealing with only 300 cattle. You are in that same size of land of 1,000 hectare, you have got 50 additional cattle under high intensity grazing. And then you will have a 80% winning rate, times that by 80%, it will give you around 280 winners per year, and then you will get around 2.1 million profit, which is an increase of what? From the first year to the second year, you get 300,000 profit increase. And then on the third year, assuming that you add additional 50 cattle again, now instead of on a land size of 1,000 hectares, 3 hectare per livestock unit, now you reduced the livestock unit to what? 2.5 hectare per livestock unit. Now you have got 400 cattle on a land carrying capacity of 1,000. Times that by 80%, it will give you around 320 winners, and then you will get another 300,000 rand profit increase per annum. And then you'll have around 2.4 million per year. So those were the assumptions that we calculated based on if the farmer were to implement high intensity grazing. The calculations were based on estimation, based on land carrying capacity of 1,000, on a land carrying capacity of 3 hectare per livestock unit. If we were to calculate that from first year to the third year, those were the benefits. And the overall economic benefits of implementing the high intensity grazing, you'll have more cattle per camp, square meters, a higher trembling effect. We spoke about the trembling effect is when the cattle step on the soil, the infiltration becomes better in terms of nutrients and the water infiltration, stimulation of pasture growth and so forth, more manure per square meter, more fresh and nutritious grasses for cattle, better body condition score for the cattle, higher conception rate, higher calving percentage, 300,000 profit increase per annum. So we spoke about the tick infestation and how the trembling effect affect the tick infestation. I'm not going to go through that. The higher intensity grazing, the economic impact of trembling, we spoke about them. Now, let's speak about the bull. In some other farms that we visited, they say the bull is always with the heifers throughout the season for the high intensity grazing. But what I noted is that some of them, they say, normally we say one bull is to 25 females under high intensity grazing because the intensity is too high and it is not that easy for one bull to get to the females that are on heat because the intensity is too high and there's not enough space of movement. Instead of putting one bull is to 25, put one bull or put 3 bull is to 25, just for the purpose of movement. Because if you just put one, it may not get to other females that are on heat during the system or during the season. So you'd rather put 3 bulls per 25, or you can rather use a breeding season. And then the breeding season, it will give you a better planning period, and then the bulls will also have enough time to rest, and then you can be able to manage your bulls thereof. And then what we also realized in terms of that is that the people who are using the high intensity grazing with a breeding program, meaning they isolate the bull with the females, they only put the females with the bull for a period of 3 months, and then they let the females go. They get better result in terms of conception than someone who's keeping the bull with the females all the time, because the bull may get tired over time. And then because, like I said, the intensity is too high, the movement is very limited and all of that, it may play a role in terms of conception rate. And the ideal body condition score, you have to monitor your cattle body condition score on a daily basis under high intensity grazing. You have to have a knowledge in terms of pasture management. You have to monitor your pasture growth, because that will be the element that will tell you if you need to move your cattle to another camp or not. But then you need to have that knowledge. Ideally, your cattle must be between 3 and 3.5 for the purpose of having conception rate of above 80%. Now, let's talk about the barriers. So when all is done and said, when all is said and done, or we're done with the research, then ideally we will have to assess also the barriers to circularity. What are the barriers to farmers in South Africa implementing circularity of nutrients in their farms? What are the barriers? Are they having any barriers or not barriers at all? So what are the barriers to engaging with these practices and circularity in a broader terms? Are there any particular practices which have notable barriers? How might these barriers have resolved? How can we resolve these barriers? What type of or what form of support does the farmers themselves need for them to be able to implement the circularity of nutrients? Just on the barriers, from the high intensity grazing perspective, we already noticed that the high intensity grazing, though, is a method that worth implementing in some areas of the countries or by farmers themselves. Some barriers from the farmers that I spoke to, they say is labor intensive, meaning they will have to employ their employees for a long extended period of time for them to be able to move the fence along. So it's labor intensive. That is number one. It's labor intensive in terms of ensuring that there's enough water availability per camp. So you need to have those camps with water availability so that the cattle don't have to walk out of the camps looking for water. That is number two. It's very expensive also in terms of ensuring that there is additional energy support during load shedding in South Africa. Because remember, high intensity grazing, you have to use electric fence. And then if there is no energy, then you may not be able to control your cattle using the same fence. So those were the barriers that they've mentioned. Other than that, if they were to get a source of a fund or anything that can assist them in terms of ensuring that they can get the electric fence, they can get the solar panel for energy support, they can be able to pay their staff to work overtime, they don't have problems in terms of implementing that type of circularity. So those are some of the barriers. And amongst other barriers, they are just basic barriers of training, because some of them, they don't know anything about circularity to start with. So they need training. They need to be educated about what does the circularity mean? How does that help in terms of sustainable agriculture? How will you benefit from circularity of nutrients as a farmer in terms of ensuring that you can still implement circularity, but then you can also benefit in terms of profitability and sustainability of your farm. Now, have you missed anything? Any factor we haven't considered that influence the uptake of circularity? That could, amongst others, include the knowledge exchange and training opportunities, like I said, time and finance cost, practicality and acceptability, policies, regulations, schemes, social network, collaborations, third-party facilitations, assurance schemes and certification, public perception and consumer demand, a circular agriculture system, agriculture system production, processing, and consumption waste and byproduct that are covered and reused or recycled as inputs. So those are some of the things that we may have to address in terms of the barriers. Is the barriers has to do with the cost of the implements? Is the barriers has to do with the training or the knowledge or the skill of the farmers? Does the barrier have to do with the public perception or consumer demand? So all those pillars or all those elements needs to be addressed. And then if there's a loophole or there's a scarce or a skill requirement in terms of any of those elements, we can also be able to assist in terms of training and ensuring that there's collaboration effort between the government, industry role players, that they can play a role in terms of implementing this system, particularly in some communal areas whereby the land are being overgrazed. Now, the next steps, the Q&As, questions and answers. The insight gained from this workshop will contribute towards identifying and developing ways to support farmers to move towards more circular practices. After the completion of our research, we will share our findings regarding the overall circularity practices, not only in South Africa, but then also in other countries that are involved. So this is very key. Some of the practices, they overlap. Some of the practices, they are easy to implement. Some of them, they are not that easy, but then we need collaboration. We need to get those answers. And as soon as we get the answers, then we can be able to know what is the way forward, how to implement those strategies. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge these role players. Amongst others includes the University of South Africa. But before I mention all of them, I just have to mention also that this project is funded by the New Zealand Agricultural Research Center. That is for greenhouse gases. And then the role players therefore includes the NI Bio, the LRI, KIT, the University of Galway, and Benko, Iraqes, ICT, Agri-Food. This is a global funding, is a global initiative. So the funding comes from all those key role players to ensure that we ensure the circularity of nutrients across the globe, but firstly by collecting data to find out what might be the barriers and what is happening on the ground as we speak of now, and then how can we improve that going forward. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I think in this session now we can take questions and we can take recommendations, and those ones who want to get clarity, they can also share information in terms of that. So I thank you very much. Thank you, Annette. I see Annette is clapping hands. I appreciate so much. Is there anyone who need to be answered? Do you have questions? Any question?
Hello.
Yes, yes, you
Hello.
can. Yes.
Can I
Now
ask a question?
Yes, yes, absolutely. You can go ahead.
Yes. I'm sorry if I'm going to ramble around. I'm based in Karoo next to Harib Dam.
Yes.
And it's very dry where I am. The capacity ratio is around. It varies. Nobody tells me the correct one, but some people are saying it's still it's 1 to 10. Others are saying 1 to 15. Now, I'm taking that example of yours of 1,000 hectares. Firstly, in terms of I'm sure your circular has to do with them the cattle rotating around, which means you'll have to cut your land into pieces. The first question is, if you are doing it properly, well, what is the average size of each camp that you need to work on, and resulting into how many camps? And then the second question is going to be, how long do you need to keep them for each camp for them to need to move to another one, or is there observation that you must have to convince you that now you must move them to Sol B and so on from Sol A? And then the third question is going to be, what informs you to take them again to your first camp for to do the whole circle thing and so on? So I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's a very brilliant question. Thank you, Mawetu. That was a very, very brilliant question. Okay, I'm going to start with the first part of your question, which speak to the separation of camps, the size of camps, if you were to implement the high intensity grazing, which is one element that increases the circularity of nutrients on your farm. So the size of your camps will be informed by the type of pastures that are found within your location. So it's not something that we can say is one size fit all type of a situation. Assessments has to be done, and then once the assessment is done, and then we can also be able to recommend, make recommendation in terms of the sizes, also basing this on some of the farmers that are already using the high intensity grazing, on how they started and then how they went forward in terms of that. But the key thing that you have to evaluate is the type of grasses and also the land carrying capacity. So the normal land carrying capacity or livestock unit of your area, we will work around it because it's very key. It will be telling, because if you were to increase the carrying capacity for your camps or double size the carrying capacity, it has to be informed by the normal carrying capacity of your area. And then we'll take it from there. The calculations has to be made based on that as well. And then the second part of your question is based on what informs you to take your cattle back to the same camps where they grazed after a period of 12 months. What will inform you? It will be the pasture growth. Remember, the rainfall is not always the same, and the pasture growth, it will always be dependent on the availability of nutrients on the soil, and then also the amount of rainfall that it rains from those areas. And then it's never consistent. It will never be the same, exactly the same. But all I can say is that you always have to assess your camps, before you take back your cattle back to the same camps or to one camp to another, you have to make assessment and check the pasture growth. Is the pasture already well grown enough so that they can be grazed? Is the pasture ready for grazing? That is the weight. Is the pasture ready for grazing? And if the answer is yes, then you can then say, make informed decision to say, okay, I'm taking them back to the camp. Some farmers, like the farmer like Danis Lapat from Rates in the Free State, he says, ideally, you have to leave the camps for about 12 months. But for him, he does the evaluations, and then he is not standard to say you count 12 months and then you take them back to the same camps. You make evaluations. At times, you may not take them, you may not start from the same camps where you started. They may overlap. You may have to make evaluations and then say, last time I started from this camp 1, I may start from camp 3 based on the evaluation that I've made on the pasture growth. So I hope I answered your questions.
Yes, we did. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And then inbox, anyone with another question, you can also raise up your hand and unmute yourself. But in the meantime, I'm just going to read the comments inbox. See my supervisor, Dr. Linda Detroit. Thank you. Is my supervisor from the University of Pretoria. And is the one who's managing the project itself from South Africa. Very informative and interesting, and thank you. Is Anete from is Anete is one of the international committee member for this project. Is one of those one of the people who are working with communications in terms of ensuring that the information that we get for this project, it gets to be published and it gets to be known, then people can also read about it and they can decide whether they want to implement it. And Patricia from Food from Zanzi, I think it's Patricia from Food from Zanzi, I hope. She says, hi, Ernest. Thank you for the presentation. With scientists reporting a possible weak La Nina, how will poor rainfall or drought influence nutrient circularity for livestock farmers? So she's speaking about La Nina that's reported to come in South Africa soon. This is what I can say. Rainfall or water plays a very important role in terms of growth of pastures, and then shift in terms of climate conditions and so forth. They will definitely impact the circularity of nutrients because there's change in patterns in terms of climate, in terms of rainfall. One thing that may stay the same is the production of the manure and the production of the urine and the production of enzymes. But that is also informed by the amount of feed available for the cattle to consume. Remember, the lesser availability of feed, the lesser manure production because the animals are not getting enough feed. So that, in a certain degree, might influence circularity because there isn't availability or enough availability of food, especially for those farmers who are using continuous grazing. There is no grazing plan. If you are not using any form of a grazing plan, you are not using any informed decision of grazing, then chances are you're going to encounter much severe impact in terms of circularity because then you are not using any grazing program or anything else like your high intensity grazing. I hope I answered you, Patricia. And then the other comment, or it's a comment or question, thank you for the presentation. Animal scientist from Eastern Cape Department of Rural Development, Agrarian Reform. That is Ndombekaya Noshfaku. Thank you, Ndombekaya from Eastern Cape Department of Agriculture. I appreciate your comment. Is there any other question? Any other question? Any other question? In the absence of questions, I'll just mention that the presentation, it will be, or the whole workshop that we had today, it will be posted on the Red Meat Industrial Services YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is called the Red Meat Industry Services. You can just go on your YouTube channel and then just type in the Red Meat Industry Services. You will find all the presentation that we had previously about the livestock management. Some of them we invited people with expertise to come share information with the audience. Some of them I presented them myself, or my colleague presented them himself. And then next month we will have another presentation that speaks to a different topic. Just watch out on our social media platform, our Facebook, Red Meat, Inclusive Growth on Facebook, and also on our LinkedIn platform. And also you can check also on our Instagram, Red Meat Industry Services. That is where you'll find the whole information regarding the webinars that we do. So, but then as of now, I would like to take this opportunity to thank and appreciate everyone who took time to come and attend and learn more about circularity of nutrients and also the high intensity grazing. I appreciate you. For any further information, you can always contact us directly, Red Meat Industrial Services, on our website, and then send us messages and we can definitely reply accordingly. Appreciate so much, and I would also lastly would like to acknowledge the funders of the project from South Africa, University of South Africa, and UNISA, the university that I'm doing my master's with, and then also appreciate our international community who is funding this project as well. I appreciate you, Annette, from Norway. I appreciate you. Until we meet again, thank you very much. In my language. Thank you.